Well, hello, everyone. Hello, great to see everyone here. Welcome to our full Changemakers speaker series. My name is Fiona Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of UNH's Sustainability Institute and also UNH's Chief Sustainability Officer. I also have the honor of being an affiliate faculty member at the Poole College of Business and Economics. So today's event is hosted by UNH's Changemaker Collaborative. It's a unique collaboration between the UNH Sustainability Institute, the Poole College of Business, and the Carsey School of Public Policy. And we really exist to offer opportunities to students like you from all of UNH's colleges. The collaborative supports and cultivates skilled, courageous, and confident leaders through real-world experiences, while also really helping to provide capacity to our community partners to advance their own sustainability initiatives. And ultimately, our goal is to help the region's sustainability efforts. So for students in the audience today, we really encourage you, students from all majors, to check out the suite of programs that we offer that will allow you to get this direct, hands-on experience in sustainability, working alongside community partners. This is experience that we know is really in high demand from future employers. One such program is our Climate Action Clinic, which pairs students with companies looking to measure and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It's a 2-credit experience. It's offered through Poole College, but again, is open to students from all across the university. And I know that your professors will be sharing information with you on how to get involved with this program and our other events at the Institute after today's events. Before we hear from today's speakers, I want to just share a few words of thanks. First of all, we would love to thank our faculty, friends, and colleagues, all of whom you see on the slide here are bringing students to today's event as part of their courses. Really a warm welcome to all of you and to your students. We're also really pleased to partner with our colleagues at UNH to offer this event. In addition to the Poole College of Business and the Carsey School of Public Policy, we also partner with the UNH Library. They provided a wonderful resource library guide for this event, as well as the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship Project, that's a mouthful, at UNH's College of Liberal Arts. They have been a consistent partner and help make these events possible. And lastly, New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, who offer today's event to their members as well. We're really grateful to our friends and colleagues at Revision Energy. They're our Changemaker Speaker Series presenting sponsor for this whole academic year. Revision Energy is a B Corp. It's a mission-driven, employee-owned solar company that operates in northern New England. Really guided by their mission and their core values, they're really showing that business can be a force for positive social change. They're prioritizing people over profit, community over competition, and sustainable growth over expansion. And they're really on a mission to make life better by building a just and equitable electric future. So we've had a long partnership with Revision Energy over many years, and we couldn't be more honored and grateful that they're the first company to be part of the new UNH Sustainability Institute Corporate Partners Program. With that, I would love to bring up our incredible speakers for today. We host the Changemaker Speaker Series because we really know of the vital importance of shining a light both on innovative practices that are advancing sustainability in meaningful ways, but also on the people, the pioneers and the thought leaders behind this work, really allowing you as UNH students to really have some wonderful role models that you can learn from. So joining us in conversation today is Ed Farrington. Ed is class of 93 from UNH, and he's currently president of North America for Impax Asset Management. He's also a UNH Sustainability Advisory Board member. Dr. Stephen Bird, who is the brand new director of the Carsey School of Public Policy here at UNH, and Clara Miller, who is UNH class of 1972. She's a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and she's president emerita of the FB Heron Foundation, also on our UNH Sustainability Advisory Board. So please come on up, everyone. You can learn more about our speakers' impressive backgrounds on our website. So thank you to all of our speakers for generously sharing their time and their insights. As a quick reminder, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A from the audience, so be thinking of your questions as we go through. And also, those of you who are at classes and you need proof of attendance for coming to this event, we'll announce how to do that at the very end of today's event. So just as the panel is joining me on stage, I just want to say a few words about the theme of today's topic. In my mind, it couldn't be more timely or more important. This weekend, I was reading an email. It's a newsletter that I subscribe to called Impact Entrepreneur, and the title was, "We Are Unprepared for the Storm." It talked about the recent devastation in the southeast United States, particularly around Asheville, North Carolina, caused by Hurricane Helene. And of course, that has just been one example of many such extreme weather events around the world this year. We have one barreling down on Florida as we speak. A really stark reminder of the escalating threat to our life, to our economy, to our way of life, posed by the climate crisis. It's really interesting. Asheville was previously had a reputation as being a very climate resilient city, but the torrential rains, the catastrophic flooding, the deadly landslides really left that region devastated. My colleague at the UNH Sustainability Institute, Jen Andrews, was unlucky enough to be on vacation there last weekend and got stranded by the aftermath of the hurricane. And she shared with us when she got back earlier this week, the almost dystopian reality of being there, witnessing homes and businesses submerged, infrastructure like roads and bridges washed away, and the city's water system really crippled. So, as I say, the topic of today's event, and really how do we address the climate crisis using the tools of business, using the tools of the financial markets, couldn't be more timely or important. So to kick us off, Ed Farrington is going to give us an opening mini keynote, and then we'll engage in a dialogue with the other panelists. So Ed, come on up.
Well, thank you, Fiona, and congratulations again on your leadership role this year. You've been incredible to me, to our firm. Yes, well done. Thank you. And to the Sustainable Advisory Board members, just raise your hand because it's really amazing to see you here, and we'll have a great session later today. But we were having lunch prior to today's talk, and one of your professors suggested that we tell some personal stories to ensure we humanize ourselves. And so I'm going to tell you one. I'm 53 years old, and I still get very nervous when I come up into in front of a crowd like this. So if you bear with me, nervousness will be replaced by energy, and I hope to deliver on what the intent of today is, which is to really help define the scope and scale of climate change, and not just as a hypothetical, but the realities of what's happening from an economic standpoint, forgetting for a moment the human standpoint, but the economic impact of climate change that's increasing at an incredibly rapid rate. But I don't want to get stuck in just the doom and gloom of it, right? There's an opportunity set that's in front of all of us, both myself and certainly all of you, in the years you'll spend in your careers and thinking about the way you conduct your lives and how you choose to spend your time will have a massive impact on our future. I want to make sure we also touch on the role of the investment community, the industry that I'm in. The size and scale of the investment community has a massive potential role to play in shaping the future we all deserve to live in. And I'll promise to finish in trying to share some thoughts on my own journey, but not as a reflection of my life, but a reflection of different choices that are made along the way that might help you think about your own. And probably let me give you the cliff notes of that, which is your journey probably won't be what you expect, but it could be exactly what you need. I've had a lot of different opportunities along the way, some good ideas, some bad ideas, some mistakes, some successes, all that I look back on as having shaped me. And let a 1993 UNH political science graduate to become the president of an investment management firm, which I find equally funny. So don't be afraid to to ask me about that part of my life. But so let me just quickly define my firm, Impax Asset Management, to give you context for where my comments will come from today. So we are a $50 billion asset management firm, headquartered in London and Portsmouth. And I can explain that as well. Those are two very different cities, but certainly both have massive attributes in terms of contributing to our culture. We are a firm that takes a very different view of the world than many traditional investment firms, in that we believe that the world is in transition from a depletive economic model that uses resources once and throws them out, that uses people and tends to discard them as well. We're in transition from that model to a more sustainable model that we think has tremendous promise for creating economic opportunity for all of us to live and raise our standards of living, but also live in a planet that can continue to sustain us, if not help us thrive as a society. So we think that many firms that do what we do either completely disregard that transition, or they misunderstand it, or at a minimum, they misprice it, and therefore that accrues to our advantage. We think we can become a better investment firm, full stop, meaning outperform from an investment return standpoint by having this understanding and view of the world, which is different, right? So that's where these comments today will come from. So let me just kick off and give you a sense of, again, putting aside the massive human toll that climate change is beginning to exact on all of us. But let's just talk about the accelerating nature of this problem and where it came from. And I'll define where it came from very quickly, because you all know it better than I do. But essentially, let's take the last century and say that we, in the developed world, raised the standard of living for millions and millions and tens of millions of people. But we largely did that on the backs of an energy system that took things out of the ground, burnt it, and fueled transportation, fueled development of cities. It fueled the way we think about agriculture, but it had this side effect, which was releasing CO2 into the atmosphere that has been slowly but surely, and now at an accelerating rate, warming the planet. And we're living in the consequences of that now. And we understand that the systems we prospered from over the last century now need to change. So there's the kind of the problem. Let me just give you some statistics as to the scale of this problem and then the economic scale of the problem, but also the opportunity. So if you took 2023, there were 28 climate events that had more than $1 billion of impact in the United States. 28 events, more than $1 billion of economic impact in different parts of the country. So those would be things like flood and drought and fire, and certainly much of this related to storm development, or the water intensity in storms these days as well, and the rapid development of storms that we're witnessing now over the last few weeks. But so in 2023, 28 events. Can anyone guess for the decade of the 80s how many events adjusted for inflation were at that scale? So 28 in 1 year, last year. For all of the 1980s, there were 39 similar events. So we're just living at a pace of these events visiting us more and more often. It's no surprise to you. You read the news, you see the news, and you see the impact this has on communities, but it also has a massive economic impact. So this is probably a conservative estimate. The global impact of such events on the economy between now and 2050 is estimated to be at least $38 trillion. And to give some scale to that, the US government next year will spend about $6 trillion. So we're talking about an economic impact on society that is almost beyond our ability to really process and understand what it will take to help mitigate these events from continuing to escalate. But certainly the other part of this is that we're going to have to adapt to the world we live in. So it requires us to build things and build things differently. And we're going to have to ask the companies we invest in or the companies we work for how they plan on navigating that, right? So at a minimum, you're talking about navigation. We're really thinking a lot about adaptation. where we live and how we live there. And we're thinking about the mitigation piece, which Stephen will touch on later, the importance of every 0.001 degree rise scenario in the impact that will have on the lives we live. Now, I said we wouldn't just say doom and gloom. That's pretty daunting. And I can imagine, I think it was Austin who referenced at our lunch earlier today, that your view of the world, if you're under the age of 30, I mean, it's been pretty heavy 3 decades in terms of the things that you've lived through: financial crises, political disruption, disinformation. Like, it's been climate catastrophes rising at an increasing rate. But believe it or not, there's been a lot of hope that is still infused in those few decades. And I'll just give you an example of a tangible way to think about that. So in the last decade alone, just the last 10 years, the cost of solar has decreased by 88%. The cost of wind, on average, both onshore and offshore, has decreased by more than 60%. Now, wind and solar and a lot of renewables have this one massive disadvantage to oil and coal. Oil and coal is just stored energy, right? So you can take it out of the ground and you can put it aside and burn it when you want. The systems we're moving to require storage, right? So there's this other piece of the puzzle that needs to be completed. But just think about the production, the energy production that's available right there on tap, essentially powered by the sun. And I won't name the company's name, but someone once famously said, if X company, energy company, could own the sun, we'd already be moved to a system that's solar and wind. But there is hope in the fact that technology and human endeavor have taken prices down so dramatically, making the economic trade to go from system A to system B a reasonable one, if not the appropriate one. I'd also say in the last 4 years, you've seen public policy move from hard to enforce agreements between countries to some very tangible results. Probably the most important in our world being the Inflation Reduction Act, which has allocated, by some estimates, up to $1 trillion or more in incentives to move from system A to new system. So public policy, as we'll hear later from both Clara and Stephen, is an incredibly important lever for change, and we're starting to see some very tangible examples of governments realizing they have to be a partner with industry in mitigating change. So let me just get to the investment world and where we can play a role and where we need to play a role and why it's so important. So you've even seen recently Secretary of State John Kerry, who went on to be the first climate ambassador, and now he's focused on working in the public sector and recognizing the scale of investment needed to solve these problems is going to require the partnership of industry and public markets. So just to give a sense, the 2 biggest markets in the world are here in the United States, publicly traded markets, New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. And just those 2 alone represent $55 trillion worth of capital, right? So I mentioned it earlier, but the US will spend about $6 trillion next year, take in about $4 trillion. So you start to get a sense of scale of what is at play when it comes to the investments, the public companies out there that are helping shape through their decisions what the world looks like that we all will live in. When we then take that down to being an investment manager and the responsibility we have to our clients. So our clients have this bizarre thing called fiduciary duty. It's actually a really good thing. It means they have to act in the economic interest of their clients. So if you're the investment committee for a public pension plan or you're an advisor for a family, you have to put the economic interest of your client first. And for years, it's been told to fiduciaries that, well, you can't take into account climate risk and your fiduciary duty. And what we'd say is that equation has completely flipped. My opinion, if you don't take these things into account, and I'll explain why in a moment, you're either mismanaging risk or you're completely missing opportunities. So let me just buzz through a few examples, and then I'll get to the end of this, which is really talking about career and what's possible for all of us together. So I'll just name 3 risks that we don't always think about when it comes to climate. One is stranded asset risk. So you can imagine if you're a company in traditional energy, you're spending billions of dollars taking things out of the earth, storing them, and then selling them. Well, if the systems change and you've spent billions at acquiring an asset and can't sell it, that's stranded asset risk. And we think it's very real and will be showing up more and more over the coming decades as renewables get cheaper and in higher demand. There's a really cool paper you can read from the Principles of Responsible Investment, and it's called Inevitable Policy Response. I always say rapid policy response, then I have to read it because I'm like, no, it's not. It's an inevitable policy response, which says that governments will eventually realize the scope and scale of any problem, and they tend not to make incremental change. Policy response tends to show up really fast. That's true of what happened with the Inflation Reduction Act. No one really saw that coming with the divided government, but it's here, and it's $1 trillion of capital going to this opportunity set. And then my company spends a lot of time on physical climate risk. So just think of it this basically: where is a company located? Where are its suppliers located? And are they at increasing risk of disruption? Meaning, can they not get the goods and services they need to build the things they need? Can their people not get to work? You'd be amazed how many human productivity hours are lost to heat alone every year. So we want to measure that and say to a company, have you thought about this? Are you building solutions to these problems? Are you at least managing the risk? Because if you're not, you're putting our capital at risk. Now, let's talk about the good side. And again, I promise to just get through this in the next 5 minutes. It's a huge investment opportunity here, right? There's just a massive investment opportunity if you open your eyes to it. So I'll just touch on a few things that you can research a bit on your own. I was fascinated to learn kind of the early stages of Google DeepMind and the work they did on the protein folding problem. Has anyone ever heard of AlphaFold? Anyone ever read into this? So essentially you have this really complex concept of trying to map proteins, and the 3D mapping of proteins is very difficult to do. It used to take PhDs 5 years to do one protein. Google DeepMind turned AI against this issue, and they're now able to do it at just scale. Like they're just mapping thousands and thousands of proteins just through the use of AI. So that's a really good side of AI, solving complex problems that took people years and years and years. Large language models can solve these problems. There comes some demands with AI, most importantly being energy demand increase and water resources needed. But let's just take on what can be solved at speed with the developments that we've seen in AI in a short period of time. The electrification of transportation, people just think that's Tesla. The way those cars operate, it's all technology, right? It's all cameras and sensors that are making that car as efficient as humanly possible so that it can maximize the battery that's in the car. So there are ways to play that as an investor, like Aptiv Technologies, which is putting the cameras in most of these cars. So you're not making a bet on Tesla, you're saying, I'm making a bet on electrification, and this is a technology leader in the space. When I think about the rising temperature issues that we're having, well, that translates into needing to heat and cool buildings more days than we did in the past. So some basic companies we've all heard of you've probably seen the brand Trane Technologies, which is Trane. It's like oftentimes the air conditioning unit in the back of your home. The ability to create more efficient ways of cooling and heating buildings through heat pumps, now incented through public policy. The way that we build buildings today is very different than we did 15, 20 years ago. And there's companies like that are poised to gain from that. So I just share those examples of risk and opportunity to say, I don't know, I just think I made a pretty good case for it. Why wouldn't you take those into account as an investor? And we think that type of thinking can help shape the investment industry and start to tilt the way we think about capital toward a brighter future. So let me finish on a couple of thoughts on what all this leads to for you and for me, which is, I think about sustainability today the way that I should have thought about technology in 1975, 1980, 1985, which was not as a thing unto itself, but as a thing that will shape everything that we touch. So every company now has a chief technology officer, every company has a tech strategy, right? There's no company that is not shaped by tech. The same will be true in your lifetime and in mine with sustainability. You're now seeing the rise of chief sustainability officers, and it's not coming from a save the world mentality. It's coming from a be the best company we can be standpoint. That's both. I've talked a lot about climate today, but it's also true, and we could have another day where we talk about humans and how we all exist at the workplace and the way we deserve to be treated and how to get the most out of a workforce by treating them with fairness and dignity. So I would say this is much like the work UNH and Fiona have endeavored over the last couple of decades. Don't think of this as a topic or a talk. Think of it as something that will shape everything you touch and see. And when you think about the time you will spend in your career and you're considering a company to join or starting a company yourself, is that being accounted for? Is it part of the ethos of that business or company or startup? Because if it's not, I would suggest to you that it will be managed for you or for them, and it will probably lead to worse outcomes for that business if they don't understand this trend. So I'm going to leave. This is a bit of a risk because I'm not great at reading long format. This takes about a minute and a half to read, but it shaped me, and it actually was given to me when I was here at UNH as a political science major. And many of you who are of my age will know some of this quote, but Robert Kennedy was running for president in 1968. He was focused a ton, if you read a book called The Last Campaign, a lot of that campaign was shaped around fairness, really around poverty and his belief that poverty should not exist in the richest nation in the world. Kids should not go to bed hungry. But in a speech that he gave in the lead up to that campaign before he was assassinated, he went further to talk about other opportunities. And I promise I'll bring this to opportunity at the end. But so he's talking poverty, but he then goes on to say, even if we act to erase material poverty, there is another greater task. It is to confront the poverty of satisfaction, purpose, and dignity that afflicts us all. Too much for too long, we have seemed to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product, now over $800 billion, a little different scale, but now over $800 billion a year, that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of natural wonder and chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet, the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to this country. It measures everything in short except what makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America except why we're proud to be Americans. That, for me, shaped me. And when I think about the opportunity you have in front of you to solve these really difficult problems and to combine your careers and your life with purpose and passion, and also have the ability to gain commercial success through that, it's an incredible time to be coming of age, and we're counting on you. So thanks.
Wow, Ed, thank you so much. Do I have to turn this on? No, good. Okay, thank you so much. Ed, thank you. That was incredible. Those words of your words and Kennedy's words equally powerful, so thank you. Before we get into a panel dialogue with Stephen and Clara, as well as Ed, we wanted just to have you do one quick thing for a couple of minutes. So you heard a lot from Ed today, and we'd really love you to just reflect on what you heard, and most importantly, kind of what you want to take away from his opening keynote. So I'm going to encourage you to turn to somebody, perhaps behind you, or to the side of you. Be brave and talk to someone you actually don't know. And just spend a couple of minutes talking about what were the things that you heard from Ed just now that you really want to remember and take away and perhaps act on. So 2 minutes, go. All right, we're going to have you come back together. So again, I hope you kind of think about some of these key messages that you heard from Ed. We'll open up for Q&A just in a little bit, but before we do that, I want to just ask the panel some questions. So we're going to start with you, Clara. So as we heard from Ed, we desperately need capital markets to flow to support this transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable economy. It's happening, for sure it's happening, but we need it to happen at much greater scale, and we need it just to happen a whole lot faster. So why is it taking longer? Why is it not? I think Ed made a very convincing statement about why we should all be investing this way. So why aren't we seeing these floodgates open? What are some of the barriers? How do you think we unleash these sort of torrents of capital that we really need to address this crisis?
So thank you, and thank you, Ed. That was terrific, and I love many of those points. And I think I've got to say that I think if we unleashed torrents of capital, we might feel like we were drinking from a fire hose, and there's a reason for that, but it's solvable. And I'd like to kind of talk, based on my experience putting money on the street as the founder of a community development financial institution focused on difficult to finance areas of the economy, and as the leader of a foundation that made the decision to invest 100% of its endowment in alignment with our mission, which was to help people in communities help themselves out of poverty. And I should just, a parenthetical remark is that when we made that decision after we had reached 100%, we went from the second quartile to the first quartile in performance, in financial performance for foundations of our size. So lest there be any idea that somehow it's negative correlation between doing the right thing and performing well financially, it's not correct. Anyway, I think the trick in effective finance, as in life, is sort of a both-and approach. So it's both the market and the enterprise level. We can't forget that the thing that gives assets their value, that gives the market its value, are the underlying enterprises that are having impact day in and day out, and that many of you in this room will be leading and working for in the years to come. And it's a tremendously exciting opportunity, I think. And by both and, yes, we need capital markets. We need the Mark Carneys of the world. And if you don't know who Mark Carney is, I'm a big fan. He was the ex-governor of the Bank of England. He's now the chairman of Bloomberg. And he was the guy who did this thing that I call intention yodeling, where you stand up at Davos and you say, we're going to put together a group who's going to provide $130 trillion of climate change finance, right? And there's lots of that behavior. Everybody's standing up saying, we're doing $1 billion for this, that, and the other thing. And yes, we need the Mark Carneys. We need those big floods of capital, no doubt. But we also need a fleet rather, of very well-equipped enterprises to actually put the money to work in projects and products and day-to-day pragmatism that will actually change things. That's where the impact happens. You can have all the money in the world and you can put a dollar bill on a child's forehead. The child doesn't automatically learn to read. You need something between the dollar and the reading. And that's mostly an enterprise, a teacher, a school, a video, whatever it is. There are challenges. So that sounds really pretty straightforward, but there are lots of challenges. And they're in what I call the plumbing. The plumbing isn't very glamorous, but it's super necessary. And when it's not working, it's very unpleasant for everybody involved. Our plumbing is antiquated, but it's fixable. And by the plumbing, I mean the rules, the invisible rules and laws, regulations, incentives, disincentives. Let's go through a few of them. Laws and regulations such as building codes, insurance, transport rules, embedded incentives and disincentives such as fossil fuel subsidies, government subsidies for a variety of things. Federal government, US federal government, is the largest purchaser of goods and services on the planet. It can buy differently. That is a gigantic subsidy that now every company in America benefits from. And perceptions and habits, maybe most importantly. The way we think about things, the way we imagine that there's a trade-off between doing things that are good for the world and good for our communities and good for our families and making money. That's a false dichotomy, as we say in the biz. So and Ed touched on this too, there's some stubborn ideas around fiduciary duty and time horizon, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. The idea that fiduciary duty is seen narrowly as money, that we have a duty to take care of this money, to keep this money safe for some time in the future when we're going to need it. That's not really fiduciary duty. And even just thinking about it as money narrowly isn't. It's taking care of beneficiaries and putting your own self-interest on the side. Doctors, lawyers, scientists all have fiduciary duty to different publics, to heal them, to take care of their legal troubles, even when it might be something that's not necessarily in alignment with the fiduciary's interests. When I was at Heron, our fiduciary duty, we made the decision to think of it as our duty to our beneficiaries, meaning if we want to help people help themselves out of poverty, that would be, how do the companies that we invest in keep people from being poor? And how, on the other side, might they drive people into poverty? We needed to look at that in the way we invested our assets, in the way we did our business, in the way we bought from anybody in the world. So that brings me to the final idea of perpetuity, because they often go hand in hand. We've got to keep this money so we'll have something to spend on the problems of the future. So we'll have something for that. So in perpetuity, what does that really mean? I mean, forever? Really? There's only one perpetuity in this world of ours, and that's nature. And nature, we're part of that perpetuity. And if we lose the ability for that perpetuity to give us life and biological longevity, we've lost it all. financial perpetuity is not necessarily nature. And I think that is what we need to put our arms around. That is what makes our fiduciary duty clear. And thank you.
Thank you, Clara. I want to just ask you one quick follow-up question,
Okay.
Just to make it really tangible for everyone in the room. So when you were the president of the Heron Foundation, whose mission was to help people lift themselves out of poverty, you chose to stop investing in certain kinds of companies. Could you just give us an example of like a kind of company that you did not invest in after that? Like what companies were helping make people more poor?
We got a Bloomberg terminal and we decided to play around with it and look at kind of what do we own? You know, we own all these things, and oh, by the way, we want more exposure in real estate that is a high employer. So we put that into the Bloomberg thing, and up pops these real estate companies, whatever they were, and we thought, okay, you know, wow, here's one over here. It seems to have a tremendous number of people, and it makes a lot of, you know, it's a public company.
And that's good because they're creating jobs that people need to help them lift themselves out of poverty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We thought jobs are good for people. They're better than not jobs if you're trying to not be poor. And so we thought, well, okay, let's click in and find out what this amazing company is, because they had more jobs than any other real estate company. Well, it was Corrections Corporation of America, which is the biggest private prison system in the world. It's now called something else that's like a toothpaste or something. You can't tell what it is. And suddenly we said to ourselves, wow, you know, that makes our fiduciary duty clear. Is that actually helping people out of poverty? So we tried to engage with the company. They didn't want to talk to us. We said, wow, you have a lot of employees. And they said, they're not employees. And we said, but, you know, there are problems which, as a fiduciary for the poor, we realized this was a company that actually was not helping the people we wanted to help, and that it was our duty to divest from this company. So that's one
Super
example.
interesting.
Thank you. There were many.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really helps I want to just build on that. I'm going to turn to Stephen, though. So, Stephen, we're so happy that you're here at UNH heading this Carsey School of Public Policy. I know you do a lot of your own scholarship and work has been around sort of energy policy, but also just, you know, how do we support people who are more vulnerable in this transition? So I'd love just to ask you to maybe address, most of the students in the room are business students, studying management and finance and marketing economics. So why should they care about public policy? And, you know, as we come into this pretty pivotal election, do you believe that our federal and local policies around climate action are really aligned with what society truly needs today?
No. No, I don't. Although we're probably doing a little bit better than we were. We're probably not doing enough. I think when I think about financial institutions and finance and capitalism, I think one of the things, I'm a political scientist, is I think about what is the role of government. And I want to be very clear, I'm actually a markets person. I really believe in competition. I really believe in the underlying power of innovation to change things and to change things for the better. That's incredibly important. But when I think about capitalism, optimized capitalism for me is really regulated capitalism. And the reason why is we don't want to go back to the 1890s when small little kids were working on railroads, right? We made a decision somewhere along the way that, yeah, we're not going to have 8-year-olds work a 10-hour day for, you know, $2.50. That could have been your reality had you been born 140 years ago, right? So I think very importantly, thinking about the critically important role that government has in not stopping capitalism, but making sure that capitalism is functioning for the public good, that all the good things in capitalism, competition, innovation, entrepreneurial components, are actually driving public goods for society. That's the really hard part. And it's hard to get right. You got to get the balance right. Sometimes governments are too bureaucratic. Sometimes there's too much regulation. It's really about a balancing system. So I think for me, when I think about capitalism and markets and finance systems, I think about the critically important role that government has in shaping how those markets work. And it's every single part of what we do every day is shaped by government, whether we're driving or paying our taxes or paying a sales tax, all of that, all of those markets, that Ed and Clara function in are constrained and limited and set up by government. And so what we've seen in the last few years is a real change, and the biggest change that occurred, so Ed mentioned the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And I want to be clear, it's pretty much what we hear about. You hear about this in the news, the Green New Deal, right? It's what we call industrial policy. All governments interfere with markets. Every government in the world interferes with markets. Russia does, China does, Senegal does, Colombia does, the United States and Canada do, right? It's really, the real question is not, are governments going to interfere with markets? It's how are they going to interfere with markets, and are they going to do interesting things that will help move us in a direction that's positive? And the thing that happened with the IRA that was quite interesting is we have a culture in the United States, and we are really, it comes back to having lived under a king that was trying to tax us for tea in Boston Harbor. You remember that whole story? All right. So we have this culture that is very problematic in terms of thinking about taxes. And so the IRA took a fundamentally different approach. They said, we're going to ignore the economists, and we're not going to institute a carbon tax. And why? For political reasons. For reasons about how people think about money. When people see taxes, they hate them, they try to get out of them, they try to escape them. And even though the smartest, most efficient thing would be have a very nice carbon tax to tax the bad thing that is hurting us, that's causing the storms, that's causing the wildfires, right? To lower it. We know that that's not going to work, right? And we actually, British Columbia, the only place in North America that has a functional carbon tax, they just got rid of it 2 months ago, and for political reasons. And so what they said instead is, what we're going to do is we're going to do what's known as industrial policy. That came from an economist by the name of Keynes, and he said, we're going to spend billions of dollars after World War II to rebuild our economy. And it's called priming the pump. And the IRA basically primes the pump. But it primes the pump in very specific ways, right? Building factories in the United States that will provide jobs, but they have to be certain kinds of factories, focused on electrification, focused on circuits that we're going to need, focusing on building solar panels, systems that don't create the problem that is now costing us huge amounts of money. I'm not sure how much the North Carolina hurricane damage is. It's going to be far more than $1 billion, though. It's going to be in the multiple billions of dollars. And the hurricane, if it remains Category 5, that's going to hit Florida tomorrow, is going to be very likely quite catastrophic. Maybe it won't. Maybe we get lucky. But those costs are now costing us more money than the gains we make from being able to drive around in a car that has gasoline or turn on lights created by coal power. And so the great challenge is how to move away from a system, right, that creates long-term costs for all of us. And those costs, as Ed was laying out, are huge. They're just absolutely massive. Wildfire costs in California, right? We had wildfire smoke here. It's killing people, right? We've seen emphysema and asthma deaths increase. And so the great challenge is shifting the gears to work with capital, to work with financial markets in such a way that we can address those kinds of challenges. So we're not doing enough yet, but I think as more and more people start to see the challenges associated with climate change, we'll work towards it. It's not going to be easy. It means changing the way we do business and the way we function. But the consequences of not changing and not taking action are very painful. They're painful for companies. They're enormously disruptive. And so the great challenge is moving towards something so that it will cost us less money. I'm not kind of some utopian person thinking about all of this. But I am optimistic about the kinds of opportunities. One of the things that we see under regulated markets is you still get disruptive, really interesting innovation. So we don't know what the unkunks are, the unknown unknowns, right? We don't know what those are yet. Those are going to be found by unique partnerships between different companies, working sometimes in concert with government. The reason those solar panels, by the way, are so cheap now was because the United States for 25 years financed research on solar panels at universities across this country, right? And there's many stories like that. So it's really about government working in concert with markets and enabling capitalism to be the right thing and the best thing that it can be. And I've seen lots of good news on that.
I love that message, Stephen, and I'll just note I'm a naturalized American, but I was, as you could probably tell from my accent, I was born in Great Britain, and I was really proud, to see that the United Kingdom, Great Britain, is the first major country to phase out coal, right? Coal is no longer going to be part of the energy equation in Great Britain, and that is a great example, I think, of sort of governments working in concert, with the market, right, to move things in the right direction. We want to bring all of you into this conversation, so we would love to hear your questions and have our panelists speak to your questions. So there are a couple of microphones in the back. There'll be sort of one in each in the aisles. Kelsey is over there, Courtney's over there, Kailei's over there. So who would like to ask questions of our speakers? There's one, Kyla, there's one right here about fifth row back. Thank you. It's on, you just speak, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do I have to stand or?
Whatever makes you most comfortable.
Okay. Ms. Miller, if I'm correct, you mentioned about when it comes to lifting or helping people out of poverty in the Heron Foundation, you mentioned that you divest in companies that maybe not creating that many jobs or you don't have like a good sustainability section. So do you think it's ethical or good to invest in companies that maybe are eager in the development of artificial intelligence or new technology or advanced technology? Because as we know, artificial intelligence have the possibility to replace jobs or, reducing the availability of jobs in the future for Americans, a lot of Americans, like recently with the protest of the dock worker. So do you think it's good for, maybe you in your position as like the chairman of the Heron Foundation, do you think it's good to invest in these companies? Because as we know, we can't really stop the development of technology as a society.
What a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, happily, I am now not the president. I'm the president emerita of the Heron Foundation. So I don't actually have to answer that extremely good question. But I can tell you the way we thought about it was not so much divestment, but investment. And so what we look for is, are there companies out there that combine all the good things about emerging technologies, including information technology, and career paths, jobs, improving the potential of people to make a living wage and have an excellent life, rather than looking at as only a negative. And there are a lot of investments out there without necessarily saying this whole category goes away. There are, I am sure, I know this sounds crazy, there are oil companies we could look at and say, wow, These guys are actually taking their excess cash and investing in technologies for the green transition rather than thinking of themselves as just oil. So I know that's a little bit of an avoidance of having to answer that very difficult general social question, but I think that's how we'd go at it.
And Ed, I'm imagining you're thinking a lot about investing.
I knew you were going to do that too.
I know. But you're up for it, I know.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the question of change, right? So we've all lived through disruptive technological change in our lifetime, and the reality of it is, now I am not discounting the fact that change visits certain parts of society in more severe ways than other parts, right? But technological change has actually been an engine for creating more jobs and higher skilled jobs over time. This one's very disruptive and I think is going to take a much more aggressive regulatory regime than, say, we did with social media. I think we all look back on social media and say, we let that one sneak by us in terms of not really thinking about the societal effect of it. I think we need to really think about AI and what it means to the job of today, tomorrow, and 10 years from now, and also what it means if it's unregulated and is allowed to find its own end result. And you see a lot of folks in that space who want very little regulation. Their belief is technology will just lift, will find its level and create good over time. This one's pretty disruptive. And so I would say, one, regulation, but two, don't discount the power of technology to actually create jobs, just different jobs, and to create higher standard of living or jobs if we invest in education and training that allows for folks to actually spend time doing higher things that are potentially more stimulating over time and more productive for the overall economy. So again, not discounting the individual that's disrupted by this, but thinking about the overall economic change. Technology's been generally a force for good. I mean, there's a lot. Austin's like smiling. I can't wait to have this chat later. But generally been a force for good from an economic standpoint. So I would say let's have a voice when it comes to politics, and let's have an opinion as individuals on the need for regulation of something this disruptive. But I'd really think it's to turn away from the possibilities of it, I think would be foolhardy and maybe impossible.
Yeah. I mean, I think your question was such a good one, in an event that's about climate change, right? Because the thing that we know is that those who are going to be most negatively and most disproportionately affected by the climate crisis is those that already have the least. And so, Stephen, I'm wondering if you can just briefly touch on, how do we make sure that this transition from fossil fuel to renewables, a sustainable economy, how do we make sure that it's a just transition that doesn't leave out those that are most vulnerable?
Yeah, you have to create policy that's focused on that very question. And we see some of that in the IRA. I want to add one comment on the AI question, because I think it's a really, really important one. I'd be looking at different AI companies and saying, which one of these companies are thinking most thoughtfully about creating data centers that are sustainable in nature? I did work on data centers, green data centers, and co-locating data centers with renewable energy. Are they being thoughtful about that? Are they being thoughtful about their language models and how there are ethical approaches to language models and less ethical approaches to language models? And there's going to be, we just don't know. That is a completely disruptive technology. It is an unk. We don't know how it's going to play out. And we should certainly be thinking about the ways in which it impacts the labor force. And there's a place for government in there. In terms of thinking about low-income and vulnerable people, you've got to actually say, hey, this is a problem that we as society want to address. We would prefer not to have really, really poor people in as part of our society. We think we can do better. And there's lots of evidence in the world that we can do better, right? There are variations in poverty levels between different countries, and that is primarily a difference between the way companies operate in those countries and the way governments operate in those countries. So in the IRA right now, there is $60 billion that has been specifically carved out and says, we're only going to invest this money in places that need the investment more than others. Places like former coal communities, right? I mean, if you're looking at a place, if you're looking West Virginia, just former all coal communities, right? We want to invest in semiconductor plants and maybe the AI industry more there than perhaps other parts of America that need the investment less. And so those kinds of focused policies, I think, can really, really make a big difference. One of our research centers at Carsey is focused on, it's called the Center for Impact Finance, and they're working to help banks work with low-income communities, because banks don't have as much experience doing that, and helping low-income communities do really transitional, high-impact work in weatherization, electrification, a whole host of other things, energy efficiency. And that's because that particular piece of legislation says, yeah, we're going to focus on this. So it has to be intentional.
Thank you. Other questions for our speakers? Yes, right down in the front here, Courtney, yellow sweater. And then Kylie, I think there's one, the next question is sort of over there, maybe fourth row. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
So thank you to all three speakers, very inspirational and extremely insightful. I'm a marketing professor. I brought my class here, so I'm sure my students are really enjoying it. So my question is primarily for Ed. So when you were talking, like what struck me most is like in terms of the climate risk, right? Become really more concretely and substantially impacting the daily business operation. So if you think about the major climate events that are happening now more frequently and impacting the businesses. So I wonder, so like from your research, right, or investment decisions, like my question is twofold. So one is, how are businesses actually handling the climate risk? So you talk about when there's extreme heat or wildfire, the business operation has to stop. So how are businesses coping to that and be more resilient? What are some of the concrete actions they are taking and how effective those actions are? And secondly, so from an investor's perspective, how do you assess a firm's climate risk, for each individual firms and incorporate that into your asset pricing or like investment decisions?
Well, if you can all stay for another 3 hours, we'll explain that. That's a great question. Like, how do you really measure that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. So, well, first, we have someone on the stage who we can partly credit for being able to do this, which is, so Clara did work for years on sustainable accounting standards. And it's really we're now living at a time of the cumulative effect of now being able to ask these questions, measure these questions, then have systems and processes to say, how can I put that into an asset pricing model? But there's some pretty extreme examples, right, that help us engage with companies, try to get them to be transparent and disclose some of the risks that we know are there that may not be as easy to spot. So we spent the last 5 years in partnership with a very large public pension plan in California, advocating for companies to be forced by the SEC to disclose their physical assets so that we could account for the physical climate risk that they're taking on and therefore passing on to investors. So there's a part of this that's just engaging with the business that we're invested in and saying, this is a risk we've identified that you're not currently seeing. Can we help you go on that journey? And then many times they will. Right? This happens all the time in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. We had a few engagements with very large media companies to address that issue as a way for them to see a risk they were taking on and not fully accounting for. There is also this unfortunate, sometimes it takes these moments where the risk is realized for a company to really begin to think about itself differently. So we've seen this with some of the big utilities that have gone bankrupt due to their sparking of wildfires in places they should have been able to predict there were wildfire risk and been managing that much more consciously. So it exists everywhere. One of the benefits of this moment in time. And again, I hate to use the word benefit, but we are no longer in a hypothetical scenario. Right? This is happening at a scale and a pace that companies and their management team are realizing that this is not debatable anymore. They have to. The hurricanes, the Helene, right? That went on shore. It's a big news and media event. It's on every channel. It's interrupted on CNN. It comes ashore, and then we kind of forget about it. 2 days later, it creates the event that it did in Asheville and the other. We need to start rethinking of what's happening here and recognizing we don't fully understand it. And I'll end with this point. The models that we've relied on are no longer good enough. We have to start predicting what the change is. If you read about how that hurricane sustained itself to deliver that much water inland days after landfall, part of that was the soil was so saturated it was able to feed that hurricane as it was over land. Right? That's just a different scenario than we lived in 50 years ago. So, long answer, engagement with companies, understanding the past models may not work, and trying to open people's eyes to what's actually happening so that we can price it.
That's great, thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. That was somewhere in the back there. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, I was just wondering what your opinions are about carbon capture and geoengineering becoming more prevalent and being seen as more of a savior than renewable energy, both from an economic standpoint and an environmental one.
Another great question. Who wants to take that big one?
I just published a paper in Canada on CCUS and impediments to the industry there. My perspective is, so right now, renewable energy technologies and storage, the price of storage, batteries, right, is dropping like a stone, similar to the way solar did a decade ago. Those technologies are incredibly powerful and useful. But here's the thing. My take on addressing something like the climate problem is we don't do one thing, or we don't do the thing that we think is the cheapest right now. I wouldn't want to over-subsidize CCUS, carbon capture and storage, because right now it seems like it's going to be really expensive. But I wouldn't want to ignore it either. Right now, I am like, let's throw every piece of spaghetti up on the wall and see what works. And we know solar and batteries and wind are going to be great, but solar and battery and winds have problems, siting problems. They use a lot of land. There are real problems when you start cutting down forests to install large-scale solar farms. I can go on and on. So I'm a huge believer in solar, but all of our energy systems have problems. And right now, the scale of the things that we need to do is so much so that I would encourage investing and thinking about all of our technological solutions. Geothermal is even more interesting. There's some really interesting stuff going on right now. Check out a company called Dandelion in Albany that just got bought by Google. Really, really interesting work.
Good stock tip. You can give that stock tip, Ed can't, so that's great. I think we are close to being out of time, but what I would love for each of you to do, we've covered a lot of pretty big stuff today, right? And we do recognize that this is a lot of information that can sometimes be hard to hold in our heads and in our hearts. And I think, sometimes we ask, what gives you hope? Why are you optimistic? And I think we are all optimists by nature. This is why we do the work that we do. But rather than asking you that question, really literally in sort of, 30 seconds or less, I'd love you to sort of just give the audience a sense of what is the agency that they have to sort of navigate these times that we're in. So what is it that these students in particular can think about doing to really kind of make a contribution to shaping the world that we all deserve to have? So maybe I'll just start with you, Clara, 30 seconds or less on what your encouragement to students is.
Take part in governance by voting. Even if it's not perfect, it never is. It wasn't when I was your age, and it will never be. But take part in it, make the hard choices, and vote, not only for president, for everybody. This is a very, very, very consequential election. So get out there and vote.
So vote up and down the ballot, not just
Up
at the
and down the
presidential.
ballot.
Yeah, great, lovely. Ed?
Yeah, so I feel like there's this misunderstood opportunity by my generation and older, which is the interconnectivity between you all can really bring communities together to solve really tough problems that require multiple people to be in one conversation. So it used to be, you know, when my parents came to the country, if you wanted to be in a certain industry, you would move to that place where those people were. Well, you have this opportunity now where you have this interconnectivity where you can seek communities where the thing you care most about, you can find that, and you can find the person that can be your sparring partner in working through an idea. And so I'll just end with this, is just use that connectivity for purpose, right? Use it for purpose and use it to find a place to spend your passion, which leads to this term of grit, right? Sticking with a problem long enough to become expert, and therefore you can help solve it. So yeah, that's what it just hits me, is that there's this chance to connect that can really be used to solve.
And to give us solace and to give us hope.
Well
We
said.
need to be surrounded by people as well for that reason, yeah. Stephen, you have the final 30 seconds here.
Okay. Back in the 1970s, showing my age here, I grew up at a time when I was having this conversation with you as we were walking down, when I was being taught to stick my head between my knees because we thought that the Russians were going to blow us up with nuclear bombs and we were going to blow them up with nuclear bombs. It felt existentially scary. I had nightmares as a 13-year-old, right? And that problem is still there. It's an awful lot less worse now than it was. And that's because lots and lots and lots of people did work to address nuclear disarmament, to think about the Cold War. People were involved in these kinds of problems oftentimes get solved. And I think we have this tendency, I certainly did, to think about these problems as dichotomous. It's either the worst thing in the world or we solved it. And climate change isn't like that. Climate change is not going to be 1.5 degrees is the thing that people talk about that we want to get to, right? And if we go past 1.5 degrees or if we go past 2 degrees, we're screwed. No, it's literally about 1/10 of a degree every time. So right now, we probably will go past 1.5, but we might stop at about 1.6 or 1.7. And I'm telling you right now, every 1/10 of a degree, these are algorithmic problems that we're talking about. If we get to 2.5 or 3 degrees Celsius, that is catastrophic. But if we get to 1.9 or 1.8, that is better than 2 or 2.1 or 2.2. And we have the capacity right now probably to get somewhere between 1.6 and 1.9. We've already changed the curve from where we thought we were going with business as usual. It's already been addressed because people have been doing the hard work of thinking about these kinds of problems. And there's going to be more problems that emerge, right? We're starting to learn lots of problems with forever chemicals and plastics and stuff. Human beings are powerful, dynamic creatures that have the ability to solve complex problems. It's never easy, it's never cheap, but there are enormous opportunities in your life to do something about that and make your living. The opportunities are literally endless right now. And do good work for people and still bring home a paycheck and put a roof over your head and all that good stuff.
Wonderful,
I believe in
wonderful ending thoughts. So I've been reading recently this wonderful book called What If We Get It Right? It's by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. It's Visions of a Climate Future. And I think it really speaks to what our speakers have been speaking about today, about how we can really think about engaging in sort of progress and positivity and action. And really claiming your agency. So please join me in thanking our speakers for today, Ed and Clara.